COVID-19 state of emergency continues to directly impact the ability of the members to meet safely in person and presents imminent risks to the health of the attendees. Therefore, no physical meeting location will be available. To access the meeting remotely, join from a PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or Android device using the URL on the agenda and on the web page for the PAB. If you do not wish for your name to appear on the screen, use the drop-down menu and click on Rename to rename yourself to be anonymous. To request to speak, use the raise hand icon on the screen. To join by phone, dial the number on the agenda and at the PAB website and enter the meeting ID from the agenda and the PAB website. If you wish to comment during the public comment portion of the agenda, press *9 and wait to be recognized. Shall we do a roll call, Director Lee?
Chair Chang, sorry about
Yes.
that. Vice Chair Mizell will be absent tonight.
Okay.
Board Member Calavita,
Here.
Harris,
Here.
Leftwich,
Here.
Levine,
Here.
Moore,
Here.
Owens,
Here.
and Ramsey.
Here.
Okay, we have quorum.
Great, thank you. And of course, I'm here, of course. I want to thank the BPT members who are here as well. With regard to the agenda, please tell me if there are any questions about the agenda.
Yes, Chair, I would request that the board postpone item number 10A regarding the Police Accountability Board budget. After the time that it was agendized, I had a meeting with the city manager and the budget office, and there's been a change in what's being proposed. I'll be meeting with the subcommittee next week, and then we would like to make a presentation at our April 6th meeting. And there's plenty of time to do that.
Sure, that's fine by me. Do we need to do a motion?
Well, you should ask if there's any other changes. And then
Before the motion, are there any other changes to the agenda for today? Neither hearing nor seeing any. Does someone want to raise a motion to approve Director Lee's proposed postponement of 10A?
So moved. Seconded.
Great. Are there any questions or objections to the motion? Neither hearing nor seeing any, the motion passes. Great. So we're going to try to keep as efficient time as we can today. So I'll be reminding folks of time as we're moving through. Is there public comment?
I see one hand raised so far, Chair,
Okay.
and that's Charles Clark.
Okay, let me pull up my timer and I'm going to share my screen. Well, okay, where's the screen shows at the bottom? Need to move faster on that. Okay, Mr. Clark, would you like to start?
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Madam Director, and members of the board, I am Charles Clark, a resident of Council District 6. I have two topics tonight. The first one concerns the interim regulations that this board has adopted and the City Council has approved, which apparently the Berkeley Police Association is challenging on the ground that it should undergo a meet and confer process in accordance with the Myers-Milius-Brown Act. It's an incredibly complex topic, but one aspect has me very concerned. My understanding is that the Director of Police Accountability wrote those interim rules to replicate the ones that the Police Review Commission had used, which had already undergone meet and confer. So the PAB equivalent ought to have been unobjectionable. But a November 5th, 2021 letter from BPA's attorney, Mr. Lucia, says on page 1, quote, although the PRC regulations were previously negotiated with the BPA, it is clear by the action taken by the PAB yet so far that they have every intention of expanding their authority beyond the legal constraints of Measure II, unquote. Now, BPA's attorney who stovepiped the documents to Berkeley side got a great story about the state of negotiations from BPA's point of view. But the city attorney has been utterly silent because her office traditionally does not try cases in the press. I would ask both sides, is there an actual conflict here or just the fear of a conflict based on every intention that BPA has ascribed to the Police Accountability Board? This comes up in the matter of complaint number 5, which I gather concerns an incident last July 14th, where the board's investigation has generated recommended findings of not sustained and unfounded. The hearing that was scheduled earlier this month has been postponed. So here I am out in the cheap seats talking for 2 minutes so far, and I don't know what this is about. I would ask the Berkeley Police Association, the Police Accountability Board, the police department, and the city attorney to make this dispute about something real and not just fears about what might happen. For starters, if the PAB interim regulations truly do replicate the ones that the PRC used, then the BPA should state what the problem with those actual regulations is. And if the board has an issue with the recommended findings of its investigators, then it should say what that problem is. I want this system to work, and this episode is not building confidence that it is working. My second topic is that the two memoranda I sent to the City Council, which I understand the director has forwarded to you. The simple message there is our police are not trigger happy, and as a result, don't cost the city very much, neither in absolute terms nor compared to similarly sized neighbors, for excessive use of force. Please factor those facts of the police department we actually have when you are thinking about this police department that we actually have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Do we have any other raised hands at this point?
Yes, Kit Saganor.
Okay, sorry, hang on a second. Let me reset the clock.
Thank you very much for taking my comments. I'll be very brief. Just in response to your previous speaker, I just want to point out that can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I just want to point out in response to the previous speaker that the charter amendment that established the PAB, of course, expanded the role of the body over what the PRC had. That was the point of having that charter amendment. If the intention of the voters of the city of Berkeley had been for the PAB to just what the PRC had done, there would have been no need for the charter amendment. So in fact, the PAB is expected and responsible to the voters to be more effective than the PRC was. And of course, that would mean doing some things in a different way. Thank you so much.
I don't see any more raised hands, Chair.
Great, thank you. Okay, so no more raised hands. And we're going to move on to item 4, approval of minutes from the regular meeting of March 9th, 2022. Are there any questions with regarding the minutes from our last regular meeting of March 9th? I'm seeing shaking heads suggesting no, I'm not hearing any.
Oh, Chair, there's a minor typo. On number 7, Lieutenant Rittenhouse reported on behalf of interim Chief Lewis, and then there's a stray word reported there. So that just needs to be deleted.
So we're going to strike the second reported. Anything else from any member of the board? So
Move we accept the minutes.
great, thank you.
Second that.
Great, so you're moving, we accept the minutes with striking out the typographical error that Director Lee noted. Any questions about this, the motion? No, I'm not hearing or seeing any objections. The motion has passed. The minutes are approved. Next are the chair and board members' reports. I don't have much to say. I want to note, number one, thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Chief Lewis, for joining us, and Lieutenant Turner. I know that you guys have busy schedules, and the evening is a difficult time with folks with families and other things going on. One important thing to note is that on March 21st, the letter was issued by the City Attorney's Office regarding the February 8th correspondence from the representatives of the BPA regarding the alleged violation of the Brown Act. They determined that no such violation occurred. They conducted a review of such. So I want to make a note of that. The PAB is very careful with regard to its communications. Sometimes we might ask as we're learning. We did get a referral from the city attorney's requested referral and guidance on a particular issue. That issue has been resolved, I believe. It was reviewed by the city's attorney. And as you see from joining these meetings, for those of you who do routinely join these meetings, these rules about the transparency of our conversations for members of our public and the transparency of our deliberations are taken very, very seriously. I state this a lot. It doesn't mean that I think that attorneys know this any better, but half of the board is composed of attorneys, many of them government attorneys. So this is a serious matter and we don't take it lightly. And I want you to know that we are monitoring this as well, but also are careful in our daily conversations, but also want folks to understand that this was something that might appear bigger than what actually had happened. So that's something I want to make sure everybody knows, and to ensure that we are very much cognizant of this concern and are also monitoring our own behavior and conduct as we move forward. So update from Board Member Calavita on the police chief search.
There's been no steering committee meetings since our last, since my last report.
Thank you. How about, yes, Vice Chair Mizell is not here. So we will not have a report out from the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force unless there's someone standing in its place.
I think probably best to hear from him at the next meeting. There's nothing, really pressing.
Okay. And I hope he has a good time. It's actually UC Berkeley's spring break. So he deserves a good rest from all the exams, et cetera. All right. So moving on to item 6. For the Director of Police Accountability's report with Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. We have had no complaints filed since the last meeting. Just within the last couple hours, I did email to the board members a copy of a case status report. Unfortunately, Ms. Martinez is not in today, and so I couldn't post it to the website, but I will have it posted tomorrow. And I wanted to know if any of the board members had any questions, and you can always ask me directly to individually if you do, or if you wanted to discuss it, we could also discuss it at the next board meeting.
Are there any questions for Director Lee?
Okay,
I guess I'll ask you really quickly.
yes.
How is the hiring going? As we move forward, and I probably should have said something about this during my section.
Oh, this is, yes, I'm prepared to address that.
Okay, cool.
So we have I understand HR, let me go back one step. Mr. Norris and I settled on a candidate that we would like to hire. Now HR has to make the offer, and I understand that they called the person and left a message. So I can't really say anything. So what happens is HR and then the candidate will work out a salary, And I will assume that that's going to be acceptable since people know what going in when they apply, what the salary range is. And then there's a background check and then some agreement about, pending that when the person will start. So I'm just, knock wood, this can all happen fairly quickly. The background check will be the fingerprints, basically, so not too much more than that. And sort of related to that is, so Byron Norris, our investigator, has postponed his retirement date to May 2nd. So what he's going to do is he's going to take a couple weeks of vacation intermittently, and that will mean that he is able to take time off to take care of things that he needs to take care of, but he will be back to help train the new temporary investigator. So I think that timing will work out, and I do appreciate him doing that. The recruitment for the permanent director position is now open. I emailed you a copy of the brochure. It's not the best. I have had a discussion with, I didn't have a discussion, I emailed the recruiter, and so we'll see what they're able to do about that. And I also had reminded them about advertising with NACOL as well. And I may have told you this, but even before a month ago or longer, the recruiter did say that they already had heard from a couple people who are interested. So I will have the link posted, but anybody who's interested or wants to refer anybody who's interested to the buyers group, the application is filed with them. And you could just, I'm sorry, I don't know their website by heart, but if you Google the Buyers Group California, you'll get to their website. Then on their current recruitments, I think is called, that tab, this director position is right on the front page. And so applications are submitted through them, and the application period runs through April 29th. And so we will hope to have a good crop of candidates. And I think, we do have agendized what role this board can play in that search. So we could talk about it. We can have a further discussion then. And if you have questions, why don't you can ask me then. The standing rules were approved March 8th. And I sent you a copy. Everybody has a copy of that. They're posted on our website. Oh, the other thing was I will post also a link to the buyers group on our website. I will have that done so people can go through our website. I hope to have that done by the end of the week. Stipends, we will be processing stipends for the first quarter of this year after the end of March. And I will resend the form that I've asked you to fill out. And the form needs to be filled out only for those, only for meetings or trainings that did not happen in a full board meeting. So, so it's anything that you did, not even, or subcommittee meeting. So anything you did outside of a meeting needs to be noted on that form and returned to me, and we'll process the stipend accordingly. So that means ride along, sit along, any of the reading that you had done on your own, or if you missed a meeting where a training was given and then you watched it later, let me know about that, because you didn't get credit for being at the meeting, but you need to get credit for the training. And that's, yeah, that form also tracks training as well as stipends that you're entitled to. I want to talk about a special meeting I wanted to have for reviewing the controlled equipment, police equipment impact statements. And I had sent out an email offering March 30th or April 6th. I think I heard from almost everybody, maybe not Board Member Ramsey. I don't, so more people can make it on the 30th than the 6th. There's one person who can't make it on the 30th and two people can't make it on the 6th. So I'm kind of leaning towards the 30th at this point. Anybody have any change of plans or other input?
Would that be 7 o'clock, Director Lee?
Yes, I think for people who work, that best fits their schedule. Okay. I
So
think
March 30th at 7 p.m.
Yes,
Okay, that works for me. Just
Okay.
my input. Yeah.
okay, thank you. So as Mr. Clark referred to in the public comments, there was well, he alluded to it, but specifically the Berkeley Police Association has filed an unfair practice charge with the Public Employees Relation Board, PERB, that is sitting with the city attorney. She has told me they're evaluating it. They probably will retain outside counsel to assist. And so, of course, as soon as I know anything, I'll let you know, or possibly a closed session will be scheduled to once the next steps have been decided on.
I think that's a great idea with a closed session. That's something that the board as a whole would want to understand the process.
Right. Well, that's what I was thinking. And I had mentioned that to Ms. Brown, the city attorney. It's not too soon to remind you that your next meeting is April 13th. Your next regular meeting is Wednesday, the 13th. The second regular meeting is set for Tuesday, the 26th, because the 27th is a holiday. I'm sorry, I don't remember which holiday it is, but one of the holidays that commissions and boards were asked to try to avoid. So I'll send out another reminder, but because it's off schedule. So that's Tuesday, the 26th is our second meeting in April. And last but not least, it's not too soon to think about the NACO annual conference in person will be in September 11th to 15th in Fort Worth, Texas. And right now I have built into the budget, I think 5 people, sending 5 people, I can't remember, at least 4. So that's 2 staff and 2 board members to go, and maybe 3 board members. And maybe the budget proposal subcommittee can talk about that too. Maybe I can increase that amount if I haven't allowed for 5. And that is, one more thing is I just wanted to sort of introduce Lieutenant Melanie Turner. She's going to be, she is the watch commander now on the shift, and we will be seeing her instead of Lieutenant Rittenhouse at our meetings. So thank you, Lieutenant Turner. And that's it for
Nice to be
me.
here.
Board Member Calavita, you had a question?
Yes, I was wondering, at one point we talked about listing our priorities for actions that we would take up. I know that we just have so much on our plate.
Right.
It seemed to me that it would be really worthwhile to maybe agendize at some point, or at least have a discussion of not triaging so much, but prioritizing what we consider the most important things to do immediately, and so forth. I think if I remember correctly, we did talk about that, but And maybe we even developed a list. It's been a while.
At one point, I had given a list of all the things that were going on. It included all the policy work and listed the investigations that were ongoing at
Right.
that point.
But I think it might be worthwhile to have a discussion of what we want to really prioritize, because, you know, there's so much that things can fall through the cracks.
Yes, you're right. Okay, I will do that. No other questions? Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Thank you so much. That was very helpful, Director Lee. And let's shift to Chief Lewis's, let me just make sure, yeah, report now. Thank you, Chief Lewis.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Sorry about that. So good evening. There's just a couple of things I wanted to talk about, and happy to answer any questions about those if they come up. One is, I know there's been a lot of interest on the recent activity around the Berkeley High School. The last couple of days, there were several instances of some fighting. I just wanted to share with the board what I can about that. Our SRO has been working extremely close with BHS and BUSD staff with a goal towards identifying the root cause of the conflict that was occurring, in an effort to try to resolve that and intervene to prevent further escalating violence. We also have requested our bike team and our patrol teams to give some extra presence around the lunchtime and after school hours throughout the remainder of the week, just to make sure that we provide some level of deterrence. Both our detective unit and our SRO will continue to work. There's several cases that have emerged, criminal cases that have emerged as a result of some of that violence, including an arrest with some weapons involved at school. So for us, it's really important to have a strong working relationship with the school and the school district so that we have those connections built. And fortunately, our SRO, based on those relationships, is really able to put us up in a good position to both identify what the underlying problem is, but to make some real headway in that investigation. So I wanted to share that case with you. The other incident that I wanted to talk about, I think it was mentioned last meeting that I didn't make. And in part, I didn't make the last meeting because I had just left a meeting with the Berkeley Drop-In Center 2 weeks ago now. So if you're not familiar with it, there was an incident at the beginning of February where we received a police report via 911 from a caller who identified themselves as an employee of the drop-in center. She gave a detailed description and reported that there was a gentleman who had assaulted someone and had a gun. Like I said, gave a detailed description. And so officers were immediately dispatched to that call, arrived on scene and found an individual that was dressed exactly as they were described, standing out in front of the drop-in center, and detained him. That whole incident lasted less than 10 minutes, the detention, but had a very strong impact on both that gentleman and other members of the drop-in center. And unfortunately, there were some communication errors in the weeks that followed. And there were some services that I think would have been beneficial earlier for folks, the staff there, to sort of process the event and talk about next steps. And as a result of some of those communication failures or breakdowns on all of our parts, we didn't connect as a group and start to collaborate until quite a bit later from that, when that incident occurred. Both since that happened, we have met multiple times with the drop-in center staff, the mayor, city manager, other department directors, including Dr. Arhus and I have met along with staff from BPD. We've met several times. We've identified some really actionable next steps, and with a focus on taking an event that had a strong negative impact on folks and turning it into an opportunity to build something, build some real collaboration, build some real relationships, and turn that into a positive opportunity has been really rewarding for us. So that some of the next steps we're looking at are fixing those communication issues so that throughout the organization, both in our departments and with community-based organizations, that people know each other, know how to get a hold of each other, have phone numbers, have had face-to-face contact or in-person contact, have built relationships. That we've also met in better ways with our community-based organizations to hear about the services they're providing and the clientele that they serve and what the special needs of that organization might be, for them to also familiarize their staff with our protocols, the ways that they can safely contact the police and engage with the police, for our Community Services Bureau to connect with those organizations, figure out how we can bring the training in both directions to our patrol teams and to other members of the department to really strengthen the bond that we do to do these services. And one of the ideas that staff at Berkeley Drop-In Center brought up was having better wraparound services. So at the end of an incident or at the end of an event, we had in mind offering not only services or feedback or connection in that moment, but that there were follow-on steps. Whereas, for example, once we get the SCU stood up, or we have other programming with other community-based organizations that provide therapy and those things, that we could have contacted those and done a referral and really kind of connected in that way. So I know there were some questions about that event, and like I said, it's been really a good opportunity for us to hear and listen about the impact and talk about like really positive next steps. And I see there's questions probably out this, so maybe before I share my last couple things, if it makes sense, we can keep talking about this. I don't know what you think, Director Lee.
Sure. Director Lee, would that make sense?
Well, yes, I was going to yield to the chair.
Sorry. Yeah,
that's okay.
Chair.
Thank you, Chief Luth. You guys are very busy, and we appreciate the difficult work that you do in challenging environments. So, I'm referencing the incident off the grounds or near the vicinity of the grounds of the high school. I have kids in Berkeley Unified, and this is always something that is a concern in the community, that during the lunch hour there are students that there's appears to have been a increasing trend in these type of fights, and that's anecdotal. I don't know if it's been tracked. There's kind of mental health issues and anxieties that I think are probably associated nationally with the pandemic and emerging out of the pandemic. And so young people often display these anxieties through potentially through frustration and behavior that may be violent. So I'm really interested in the type of Community Services Bureau that you have, and the type of preemptive type of engagement work that you do. That's really great to hear. And I know you guys have lots of outreach in that area. How was that engagement conducted with regard to the high school outside of either with the SRO, Officer Mitchell, or in collaboration with Officer Mitchell for young people at the high school, which is a real locus of these fights?
Yeah, that's also it brings me up to a point that I was going to make later about our current staffing levels. There are ways that we could do much more of this and be more effective in this type of engagement and collaborative work. We are really stretched for personnel. And a perfect example is what I mentioned that we're doing at lunch and after school at the high school, right? And how much that strains our ability to respond to other calls or deal with other issues. But really, we don't want to be in a reactive mode in dealing with these kinds of incidences. And somebody else mentioned to me the time of year it was. And historically, I remember that this time of year is often a time of year when incidents at the high school started to pick up. And sort of understanding that, and then also understanding the anxieties that you were talking about, and sort of the things that high school students might be experiencing around the pandemic, but also around the seasons, and as the end of year approaches and things like that. Really, the goal is both via our SRO being connected to the kids and working with the staff, and knowing and having relationships where he is regularly contacted by students who want to report things that happened a long time ago or recently, because they build that trust relationship. And we work best when we have the ability and space and time to build those relationships. What would be even more, and then another thing that we do is we do partner with the high school, where we have officers go over and teach and participate in presentations as part of the Pathways to Justice program that they have over there. And that's another place where they build relationships. But if we had the ability to return back to some of the staffing levels that we had before and some of the programming we had before, our engagement team would be built out with both sworn staff and non-sworn staff that would have the capacity to meet with community-based organizations, meet with youth groups, work with work more with some of the groups that we already work with, some of the sports and art and cheerleading and all the other youth programming out there, work more with the Parks and Rec programming around youth to continue to build out those relationships. And then you get to the point where before these things happen, because what we often find with juvenile related crime is that the kids are talking to each other. They're talking to each other and it's all over social media these days. And if we have trust relationships built with not only the leaders in all of those youth groups and those faith-based organizations, but also the kids in those programs, we can intervene much earlier, and something that might blow up to a really big situation never gets there because we're able to intervene. So those are the places we're trying to go. Honestly, with the current staffing that we have, it's challenging to get there. And really, what I hope emerges out of the reimagining process is space for us to develop that internally, but also space for us to see that those things stood up and strengthened in the city, those other organizations in the city that can provide complementary and collaborative support to that.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And absolutely, those wraparound services, standing them up and staffing them properly can increase that type of positive engagement. There's also often questions around these incidents on school campuses about mitigating disparate outcomes based upon race in particular, with arrests and referrals to police. And so it's often the question that's emerged about the use of SROs, who are law enforcement officers on campus. Are there, in terms of not just Officer Mitchell, who I assume he can't be the only person going to these fights, which I've heard involve could be a couple dozen or more students. Officer Mitchell sounds like he's been trained up on this and continuously engages with these students, and therefore has a kind of personal relationship with many of them. Maybe has some, a degree of intimacy with them and awareness. So with the other officers who are on the beat in downtown Berkeley during lunch, are they provided with that type of training to understand how to respond to youth versus, adults? And for the type of de-escalation type of tactics, which would be important to avoid the type of disparities that can emerge, have been found nationally in terms of school referrals for arrests for students and minors.
Yeah, so you bring up a couple points, and all of our officers are CIT trained. All of our officers receive regular de-escalation training. As far as specific youth-related training, I'm not trying to think of some programming that we have that reflects directly on that, and other than some of the courses that our school resource officer attends about working directly with school staff or students on a campus. We don't have a really robust program of training for officers in that area. I mean, it's a great idea and something we can explore. And so, one of the things that I find most valuable about having an SRO on campus is to combat exactly what you're describing, which is that disparity, because that officer has a trust relationship built with not only the students, but with staff. And so when things don't rise to the level of an arrest or a police report, but they can be handled internally, then that's done. Like, for example, I know there were multiple suspensions as a result of the things that happened over the course of the last 2 days. But there were a very small number of arrests, and those were because of some very serious offenses by those individuals. So there's a measured response when we address these things, but that works best when we have that space for collaboration and trust.
Thank you. And of course, some of those references you made to the arrests, under the California Education Code, some of those are mandatory. And of course, with off-campus behavior, possession of firearms, et cetera, they're especially with not licensed, I would assume. But minors, I would assume they would not be licensed. But I don't have a gun license, so I don't know for sure. Thank you so much, and I certainly would. I will continue, and I appreciate you bringing to our attention the broader community safety issues with regard to the school and that corridor around BHS, and I would certainly want to support the police department in terms of their training efforts for youth-related responses. We have a lot of priorities, but that's certainly something that's very important given that Shattuck Avenue business corridor during the lunch hour. Sorry, I've been talking and taking up a lot of the time. Board Member Leftwich would like to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chief, for your report and for being here tonight. I just had a quick question about the drop-in center incident. So it sounds like that was the result of a false report to the police. And I was wondering if there were efforts to track this person down. It sounds like a woman who had a vendetta against this guy, or if that's, hard to do based on a call into, the system. I was wondering if you could just comment briefly about that.
Yeah, sure. So we did document it as a criminal case, a false report to law enforcement based on the clear facts once they were established that was a false report. We did do some follow-on investigation trying to track down the phone number that was used and associated to that phone number. And there was some information provided by individuals on scene about who it likely was or possibly was. And we believe there were some mental health issues involved with that person. They made that call.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if there's no other questions, was there another question? I'm sorry, about either one of those.
No, I was going to say that you could proceed. I was double checking for questions,
thanks.
but thank you.
The only other thing that I was going to touch on, which I think I hit a little bit already, was I just wanted to share that two things. One is that as I start the budget process and developing my portion of the city manager's response or staff recommendations around reimagining, that's really consuming a lot of my time right now, putting a lot of thought into everything that we've heard, both through the fair and impartial policing work and the reimagining public safety task force work, to really incorporate and infuse a lot of those concepts into the ideas. And it looks like my camera cut off. Can you still hear me? Okay, great. Sorry.
Yes, we can still see you too.
We can still see you too.
Okay, my face is frozen on my end, so I apologize if you're still good on your end. Anyway, so as we build out the recommendations and our goals for how we are reimagining best being able to invest in our department, in public safety, in our community. I'm extremely mindful of all those concepts and everything we've heard from both the community, this board, and the task force that have been engaged in that work. I did want to share, if it wasn't already on your calendar, that April 14th is now that council special meeting for that presentation. So that's when that presentation is going to occur. And that will be a presentation where all the department pieces that are part of this work. So the BERC conversation, the specialized care unit, the dispatching pieces, the overall public safety pieces, those are all going to be part of that presentation on the 14th. So I think that'll be a really important one. And certainly as I start to develop what we'll be presenting, I will be sharing that as soon as I'm able with the PAB also, so you can see sort of the framing that we are working with as we identify our steps forward. And then I did mention budget. So a lot of that is going to align with the budget process as we approach our 2-year budget cycle for the year. A lot of the reimagining work that's going to be front and center for me as I develop my proposed budget. And again, that will also come to the PAB as part of this process. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Chief Lewis. I appreciate the check-in and your time. Are there any other questions for Chief Lewis? So neither seeing or hearing.
I'm sorry, I had one more thing. I'm sorry.
Sure. Yeah.
I know that I had sent the board a copy of our updated consent search form. I realized the one I sent you had, when it got transferred from a Word doc to a PDF, it actually moved some of the boxes that are in the form. So I will be getting to Director Lee shortly the actual form. So you'll see where the boxes are supposed to be. I think it'll make more sense when you see the version I should have sent you. So my apologies for that.
Thank you. The formatting will be correct. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And are there any other questions for Chief Lewis? No. So we can, thank you so much. So we can move on to item 8. So it's 7:48. Ideally, when we don't have closed session, we should try to keep it to 2 hours to help everybody's manage their time and also the public's time. And I've said that, but I've talked a lot this time around too. So I apologize for that. But subcommittee reports. How about the fair and impartial policing implementation?
Yes, our last meeting was March 16th, and we're currently getting people's schedules together so we can meet hopefully next week again. Hopefully we'll be meeting every other week or so. And we have received from the department the draft policy for the EIS program, as well as the chief mentioned, the consent search form. And we've been working with those, the committee's been working with those, and we'll be proposing some modifications, and we hope to have that to the full board at our meeting on the 30th. Well, I guess now it will be our first meeting in April. So that's it for me.
Thank you. Are there any questions about that? I'm going to take a break, and I'll be back in a few minutes. If Board Member Calavita can act for me for the next item, that would be appreciated.
So this is the subcommittee on the director's search, the director for the Police Accountability Board.
I can speak to that. We all got a copy of the brochure as it was finally produced by the buyers group. We spent time and submitted edits, and to a large degree they were incorporated in the written material. We never saw any photographs or illustrations that were proposed, nor were we asked to suggest any. So the final form comes out almost diminishing the language. I think the illustrations are at a minimum confusing the photographs, but that's neither here nor there. I'm at this point interested and have tried, I'm in the process of setting up another meeting so that we're instrumental, hopefully, in the next phase of the selection process. Director Lee spoke up. Are you going to talk about that more tonight? Is that something that you're going to talk about? But we sort of were given guidance by the buyers group with regard to the various stages that we'd be given the opportunity to give input. So I just want to make sure we're still part of that process because there's a lot of important milestones, the least of which is not the least of which is the vetting the candidates. So I don't need to speak about it, but I just want to make sure that we're a part of all that. And I'll speak to Director Lee when it's appropriate, or to the buyers group, and just restate our desires. But I've tried to schedule a meeting. I haven't gotten it scheduled yet.
Later on the agenda on old business is 9B, consider ways to contribute to the hiring and selection of the permanent director as well as the investigator. And I agendized that at your request, or re-agendized it at your request. So.
Okay, so I'll be quiet now if we're going to talk more about it then.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chair Chang, are you back again?
Yes, thank you so much, Board Member Calavita. And regulations, which I am the chair of. We met on March 22nd. We are working very hard and going through in a lot of detail and review of every word and phrase of the regulation. We've gone through it 1.5 times very carefully. We're almost done with our second pass. And I am hopeful that we will be done in 2 more meetings. And we're leaving a third one as a third meeting as a potential kind of clean up everything, tie the loose ends together. But we are hopeful that we'll have something in a number of weeks. And we know that folks are anticipating this set of revisions on the permanent regulations. Okay. How about mental health issue? Oh, sorry. Anyone on the regulations committee wanted to add anything? Yes, Board Member Leftwich.
Well, I was just thinking about when we bring our final draft to the full board, that we're going to need a lot of time, and we don't need to decide that tonight. But I'm just thinking we should figure out how we're going to deal with that, because it's a lot.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll do a memo kind of highlighting some of the issues that we really need input from the board on or something, but it could take a long time. So I can't see us doing much else on a meeting where we're discussing, where we're having a vote on that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Board Member Leftwich. Director Lee would like to add something to that.
I think a memo is a great idea. We could sort of highlight some of the areas that we thought were sort of tricky. I don't want to say problematic. I guess there's a group of sections that are sort of tricky, and then there's another group where maybe the subcommittee is not in agreement and we want more input from the full board. It could be that the discussion would take maybe a couple meetings. I think it's hard, it depends on what else is going on, but it's really hard to have a meeting where you don't do any other business just because you are doing a lot. And so because we have other things to take care of, even though it could well take an entire meeting, it's hard to do that. So maybe we should plan on taking a couple meetings. That would also, the advantage of that would be giving other board members an opportunity to think more deeply about the proposal. So.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And so for the rest of the board, just so you know, it's not like you're looking at this totally new in a sense. This special committee has reviewed it. We're going to pinpoint issues of concern to you in the committee, and we're going to lead the discussion so you understand the kind of places where we might want to flesh out issues, hammer out questions. But a lot of work has been done again before, so it's not like we're relitigating every single phrase in that sense. But of course, your opinion and viewpoints are very important, but we will direct folks to the portions that we felt raised the biggest questions or concerns. Okay, how about mental health issues?
Should I speak to that? Again, this is that subcommittee that was taking a leave of absence. It's really only the two of us, Board Member Harris and myself, and one public member. Some time ago, we expressed concern because we're all on these other subcommittees, and the urgent ones, budget, director search, et cetera, took priority. So we sort of put the mental health subcommittee, now called mental health issues, because we broadened its scope of interest. And I may have misunderstood or miscommunicated at the last meeting when the subcommittee from the Santa Rita subcommittee of the mental health division, that I don't know their commission, thought we were going to join our meetings together and have those in addition to our own subcommittee. And I didn't intend that. So I hopefully clarified that through correspondence during this interim period, that we were very concerned and interested in what they're doing, but can't come to their meetings. And I hope to continue communicating with them so that in the future, when there is more time, maybe we can join up. I don't know. It's hard for me to see that through that long tunnel. So that's my,
Thank you.
Director Lee might have more to add, but that's sort of how I saw it.
I don't really have anything to add. I think you've
Okay.
covered it pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. I agree too. So, but I think it was your response, I think, was clear. And like I said in my response, Director Lee, that, we need to have some time to get our committee together too. But it would be great to work hand in hand with them at some point. So thank you, Davi.
Thank you, Regina.
Thank you very much. And of course, I should remind folks that we all appreciate all the efforts of board members being on these committees on top of the general meetings. A number of folks are on more than one committee. Policy 351, fixed surveillance cameras.
I don't believe this subcommittee has met yet, and one of them, it's board members Ramsey and Vice Chair Mizell, and
Okay.
I will just continue to remind them.
Sure.
I sent out one nudge.
Okay. Is that okay, board member Ramsey, or do you have something to add?
No, that's fine. Don't have anything to add.
Great, thank you. So the
Chair Chang,
Yeah.
I actually had a question about,
Sure.
to Director Lee, maybe. Do you know where does this issue of the fixed surveillance cameras stand at council? Like, do we,
They've approved the funding and the locations, as far as I understand. And they directed staff to develop a policy, which they did, and that's what prompted us to say, oh, we didn't know about this. So,
Yeah.
well, we got the policy after it was developed. So
so this subcommittee is to review the policy and offer suggestions?
right, that was my understanding.
Is there any time frame that we have to do that within?
Since this is something that you took up on your own, no, it just would be a self-imposed time frame.
Okay.
I would
So
assume
it's
sooner's better than later, because they may be, I don't know when they're planned to be operational.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And that does bring something that reminds me with the relation to that process, with it having gone through city council and then us finding kind of late. Everybody's very busy, so we're not like dropping in on the council meetings and following the minutes. It would be very helpful moving forward in the future once the new director comes on board and we have that pivot with the staffing, that a policy person be brought on to be able to help the board to monitor this. And I think Director Lee has spoken to this before. You can imagine the complexity around doing that director position and or conducting investigations, and also trying to keep in touch and monitor rules and regulations passing through city council. So things like this can fall through the cracks. And it's important to have that person to set up that relationship and have that communication channel so that we can have input before it actually becomes a rule or a law. Board Member Calavita?
Yes, it seems to me that we should communicate with the city clerk, or I don't know, the appropriate entity or position, that we need to be notified. It's not just that we need to be constantly looking ourselves, but we're the PAB and we should be notified when these things are on the agenda. So I think that we need to let the clerk or whoever it would be know that we need to be CC'd on all of these things.
I agree.
What do you mean by CC?
Well, I mean, when others are notified that such and such is coming up, or is that not, it seems to me appropriate that we should be informed when the policing issues are being raised at council.
Well, that would be nice, but I'm not sure who would be doing that. And that's what I do now, is I keep an eye on, I read all the agendas of the Agenda and Rules Committee so that I know what's coming up to council. And I follow the Public Safety Policy Committee agendas as well.
Yeah, so that was my mention that I
But
think.
the issue with the cameras is that the policy was issued. The policy was issued at the direction of council. The policy was developed and issued.
Yeah.
And so that didn't go back to council. Council authorized the money, authorized the locations, and said, develop a policy and let us know about it, but they didn't say we have to approve it. So that's why it never was on an agenda.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And that's what I mean, Board Member Calavita, is that, for example, currently Director Lee is really doing two positions. And that's part of the circumstance of pivoting into the PAB from the PRC back in June or July. So if you have a policy person who city council, whose sole main responsibility would be managing those relationships with city council and getting a reportage out, some type of communications channel through city council, and explaining to them, this falls into the classification of a policing matter. Because the other issue is the scope of our authority is something that's emergent and that we need to build and construct. And part of that building and constructing of the scope of our authority is that engagement. But I think it'd be very difficult for one person who's running these meetings, also doing all the background stuff with the agendizing, et cetera, going to all the committee meetings, can also take care of that aspect of kind of constructing the scope through these communications channels and educating basically the city council and the public of what our scope of authority is with regard to what is policing. They honestly might have thought that that surveillance cameras, I think they should have, but they might have thought that surveillance cameras placed throughout the city in different places where there are higher levels of crime was not something that would need to be debated in the public forum or consulted with through this entity. Obviously, I think most of us, if not all of us, think that we at least should have had a pass at having a conversation about it in some sense, in some portion of that process of it becoming a actual local law. So that's my 2 cents on that anyways. Does Does Board Member Ramsey want to say something? You seem to come off mute.
Yeah, I just had a question. Are we talking about the sort of decision by the council to purchase the surveillance cameras and to position them throughout the city, or are we talking about the use policy of how the cameras would be used once they were purchased and deployed?
We're talking about the use policy now because they've been purchased. So,
But in terms of us not receiving notice.
oh. Well, it was on the agenda. It was agendized.
Okay.
So,
I guess the question I had assumed we were talking about the use policy, and obviously we're just an advisory board. I know that during the PRC years, at least while I was on it for a couple of years, there seemed to be an informal agreement with the police command staff that if there was a significant new policy coming on force, that they would seek our advice. And it's not clear to me whether that's still the policy, the agreement or not, whether we still have an informal agreement in that regard. And so to me, it seems like it would have applied in this situation, that once the council authorized the deployment of the cameras, and then we then would need a use policy would then need to be put into place, that during the course of the development of that use policy, the department would have reached out to us just to receive our input. And I mean, I guess the real question I have is, do we still have that informal agreement, or has that been tossed to the way, has that been put to the wayside since we became the Police Accountability Board? And if so, it does seem like we should see whether we can get the department to recommit to that agreement. And it's not just in the surveillance area, even in
I agree with
like
that.
consent form, but in other things. But going forward, that seems to be a significant thing. And the only thing that I've seen, discussed about this is something that I think the chief has sort of backed off a little bit, but was in the letter which she sent to us about the consent form and the EIS, in which she said that the charter amendment didn't require that she provide these policies to us for 30 days till 30 days after implementation. I understand that that's the minimum, but still I'm wondering whether we can have the old informal agreement that we had. Seems like that would make a lot of sense. I mean, in the same way that the chief has indicated that she informally speaks to the union about policies, and that the consent form, she was informally speaking to the union. I think it would make sense that she also, put the PAB into that informal process of seeking input on these issues.
Board Member Ramsey, I'm not sure there was ever an informal agreement, but I'm happy to have a discussion with Chief Lewis, who seems not to be in the meeting any longer, but I'll make a note of that and I can talk to her about it.
Yeah, that would be great. And I think Lieutenant Turner, is she here in her steed as well?
She's, yes, taking notes on behalf of the chief.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I'll pass it along.
Thank you. I think that's a priority based on some of the other issues that we raised about finding out about incidents through like Berkeley side or something like that. Just a little different than that, but there have been stuff that cropped up, and I know that there's a lot of events and you guys are super busy. We're trying to kind of put in place certain practices for communication so that there's healthy and robust engagement is always good as well.
And Chair Chang, I mean, I do think it's important to be updated on events that are happening through the city, through the chief's report. But this is even beyond that. This is really specific to policies that are being implemented. I understand that they're, through city council or not through city council. I mean, just any policies, of significance that are being implemented, and they're going through the process of developing the policies. It seems that it would make the most sense to have our input while you're developing those policies, rather than waiting till 30 days after they're implemented and then sending them to us.
Yeah.
Just by efficiency, if we wait until after implementation and we're separate from any discussions with the BPA, it seems to be, creating a situation where you may end up with a meet and confer that's unnecessary, because maybe those things could have been talked through informally with all sorts of different parties. But the bottom line is it's trying to get our input into the development of policies, which seems to be the whole purpose of having a civilian oversight board, or one of the major purposes. And so it seems like getting that input sooner rather than later makes sense.
Yeah, I can't agree more. That's really important for mitigating potential, not conflicts for lack of a better term, but processes to then turn back and revise policy that could have been addressed before it got to that level. Thank you, I appreciate that. Board Member Calavita has her hand up.
Just very quickly, is policy 351 being implemented already? Sergeant Turner, do you know?
Lieutenant Turner.
I'm sorry.
Lieutenant.
Lieutenant.
Okay, I'd have to check and see if it's, I'm actually not sure. Sorry, Kitty. I don't know where it is in the process right now.
That's
I
all
can
right.
find out.
It's just that it's, this has been on our agenda for a while, and time it passes, and even though it is not sufficient in the minds of many of us, the charter amendment does say that within 30 days of implementation, we need to be able to review these policies. So I don't know if it's been 30 days, but that's something to consider.
It's not on the website, so I don't think it's a live policy. I'd have to find out. It's not on the website, so I don't know where in the development of the policy we are right now, but I can find out and let you know.
Thank you.
Thank you, that'd be helpful. Okay, any more questions about that, comments? All right, so it's 8:14, would try to hit by 9 possible. PAB budget proposal, which met on March 15th.
So we met on March 15th and was looking to put together a letter for the entire board to submit to the city council in support of the budget that the director was going to submit. But in the interim, the director met with the city manager through the budget process and received some additional information. So we are going to meet again on the 31st, the budget subcommittee, to discuss those additional changes that are proposed for the budget, and hopefully have a letter ready to go for the next regular board meeting.
Thank you. Any comments or questions on that? Okay, so I'm just reflecting on my comment about 9 o'clock. I don't think it's going to be possible. We want to be as efficient as possible. There's a training with Lieutenant Lindo, which we're looking forward to. That's projected at 1 hour. Great. For old business, moving forward, there's a review of policy 319, hate crimes, as requested by City Council. This is an agenda packet from February 23rd, page 13. So, yeah.
Conveniently, Lieutenant Turner, who is here as watch commander, also is in charge of the department's efforts on hate crime responses. So I've asked her to sort of give us an update on a general overview on what's happening in the department, and then if she could, whatever guidance she could provide us to the policy itself and help us figure out what we should be doing, I would appreciate that.
So yeah, that is correct. I am our point person on the response to the referral on improving hate crime reporting and response that City Council pushed forward back at the end of 2020. The referral asks for a review of of how the city responds to hate crimes and how we report them, and asked for input from numerous city departments to include us, the police department, obviously at that time, I believe PRC and now PAB, as well as Berkeley Mental Health, Peace and Justice Commission, Youth Commission, IT. So over last summer, early fall, we put together a working group to discuss our respective roles in and to sort of identify the areas to work on. Speaking just from our, I can't speak on what some of the other departments have accomplished at this point, but in terms of our work at the PD, we've been able to address some of the asks, which one ask was to launch a public information campaign, which we did do a video on defining what a hate crime is, how to report it, how we respond. Chair Chang assisted us with that video, so thank you for that. We also had some folks from the department participate in that video. We have reviewed the possibility of allowing hate crimes to be reported online. We are working on connecting with BUSD with their Title IX. I'm not sure of the full title, and I think Chair Chang, you might be able to speak on the exact title of this position at BUSD, but Rob Jimenez was previously the person in that position, but he's no longer there. I've recently connected with the new person in that position to build our relationship there with BUSD and how we can better respond to hate crimes there at the school. We are working on adding hate crime reports into the public dashboard. I'm not saying that right. There's a name for the public facing dashboard. That's not something that's live yet, but that will be included. So that's some of the work that we've done so far. There is some additional work that we would like to do, primarily our community building with churches, the school, and other community groups. And then in terms of the policy itself, the policy is 319. It is on the website, and it was updated as of, I think, January 3rd of this year, to include the most recent legislative mandates that it needed to have as of January 1 of 2022.
Thank you. That was really helpful, Lieutenant Turner. So this request, and I appreciate your work on this, Lieutenant Turner, as well, and the departments, and engaging with the school district as well. So the request by City Council is essentially to review it. I know that it's something that I think we had postponed another time, and is going to take some time to review. Do folks feel like they want to do a pass over this, right? I mean, review it quickly right now and then come back so we can get it started? Or is it something that we think that we need additional time? And we certainly could utilize the expertise of the lieutenant who's here to ask questions and look at the document if need be. So the body of it looks to be, there's an addenda. So I'm just trying to see how long the actual policy is.
Could I ask a question, Chair? I wanted to know from Lieutenant Turner, what were the legislative mandates that had to be included?
You give me 1 second, I can.
Okay.
Go. Sorry. So
I see there's a checklist that wasn't there before?
So can you still see me and hear me? I'm looking at something else while I'm,
Yes.
okay. So January 1 of 2022, there was 2 assembly bills. One was 600. That was under the law now. There is immigration status as a protected group. And so that falls under I think under nationality, I believe. It's either nationality or race and ethnicity. I'm not sure. I don't have the actual language right in front of me. And then Assembly Bill 57 amended the reporting to a, I'm just going to read it. Amended law in light of recent reports and studies of hate crimes and the failure to identify, report, and respond to these crimes. The legislation also amended the law to identify an additional element of bias motivation. So there's more language in bias motivation, and this state now has to include when we do hate crime training, to include the recognition of religion bias.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. So that's super helpful. I was just pulling out some of that online too. Board Member Leftwich?
I was just going to say the policy looks good to me. I don't know what other people think. I don't know if we need a lot, another meeting to discuss it, but again, I don't know if other people have thoughts.
So, yeah, can we also, in terms of the history and looking at it with regard to the front end of it and reference to the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, which, if some of you don't know, took over a decade to pass to include categories that were not included. And some of you know about what happened to Matt Shepard. He was a LGBTQ man who was beaten and left out to die and did die. It took some time to get that passed. Some folks didn't want that category added. So the fact that that has passed and its reference here is a good sign to me. But in addition, I do like the structure of it with regard to the definitions up front and the protected classifications. I haven't had, to be honest, a whole lot of time to look it over. But what would help also is if we could get a quick overview of the history of the policy, like whose hands has it passed through, for example? Is this purely a Lexipol off the shelf, or has there been additional changes made to it?
I wasn't involved in the putting the policy together, so I couldn't answer that today. I'm not sure who's all sort of touched the policy, so I could find out. It
currently does have a Lexipol copyright at the bottom. So it does look like it might be off the shelf.
Even my understanding, excuse me, Chair, my understanding is even if they're changed, that the copyright stays
Oh,
there.
sure. Okay. That's
And,
interesting.
I see Sergeant Ledoux has his camera on, so maybe he's ready to say so. Sergeant Ledoux, I'm gonna put him on the spot because he is in charge of overseeing the whole conversion in the Lexipol, and maybe he knows something about 319.
Good morning or evening. Sorry, it's been a long day. So I was just flipping screens and it looks like 2018 I went to PRC, and 2019 it actually passed the PRC subcommittee and then full committee. That has gone through everyone. After that process, now moving forward, the updates have just been legislative updates. That's the only changes to that policy, if that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that is helpful.
Thank you.
It hasn't come before our body, obviously, but at least it did go through the PRC. So what are thoughts and get input from everybody on what's the best way to move through this? Do we want to, does anyone have any comments on the actual language? It does sound like it's gone through PRC. It does not appear to be off the shelf, therefore. And do we want to go through it like very quickly section by section without reviewing each minutia? Or do you think we need more time to go over it? We could always revisit again, but do like a first quick pass of it. So it goes from page 13 to page 16, and there's some attachments there. From
February 23rd.
Yeah, I'm sorry. February 23rd, 2022 agenda, which you can pull up online from the Police Accountability Board website if you don't have it in front of you or a hard copy.
Can we just, I would vote to just go through it really quickly, because
Okay.
it's fine to me, but.
How about we do that? At least we're doing a first pass. I just bearing the time, marking the times 8:27. Does someone want me to share the screen to look at it, or?
I think that would be helpful.
Okay. So I just.
I mean, I have it in front of me, but I don't know if everyone does.
Yeah, let me share the screen. Okay. Can everyone see it now?
Yes, I can see it.
Yes.
Okay. All right. It has the formatting, which is not untypical of Lexipol, I believe. Some of you have more experience with having been on the Lexipol subcommittee. Purpose and scope, for those who are on the phone. And meet, exceed the provisions of Penal Code Section 13519.6C. Meet and exceed provides members of this department with guidelines for identifying and investigating incidents and crimes that may be motivated by hatred or other bias. Any questions about that or comments as we look through this? I've not specifically taken a look at Penal Code 13519.6C. It's saying that it would meet or exceed the provisions of that penal code. If someone wants to take a quick look at it on their screens, they could. And then we'll keep proceeding unless someone wants to raise a question or comment. So definitions, again, hate crimes are a criminal act in whole or part, one or more of the following actual or perceived characteristics of the victim. And it lists the sets of penal codes there. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 7 categories, with the last one, H, being examples of hate crimes, because sometimes that can be confusing to folks between hate crimes versus hate violence. There's disability, gender identity or gender expression, nationality, race or ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, association with a person or group with one or more of these actual or perceived characteristics. And finally, the examples. And as Lieutenant Turner reflected, there's been some recent legal language around status of citizenship status or immigration status, and that typically probably falls under nationality, national origin is my assumption, protection. So with that type of language, would we need to add the protections for Lieutenant Turner, is the language immigration status or citizenship status?
I would have to read the Assembly bill again. I had looked at it briefly. I think it's immigration status, but
Okay,
I'd have to.
thank you. That's super helpful. And I'm glad you flagged that for us. I was actually not aware of that. Would that be something that should be added as a class, as a category? You know, I guess my assumption is referencing, folks who are undocumented versus with citizenship status or otherwise. There are probably some ancillary bases for that, and it's protected probably under nationality as a interpretation of national origin prohibitions against national origin based discrimination, hate crimes. Yes, Board Member Levine.
I don't think it is the same as nationality. I think immigration status has a much broader poses a much broader threat to a large group of people based on their citizenship or lack thereof, or their immigration status, permanent residency, etc. And it implicates their right to be free of detentions or accusations that might lead to a detention based on, their identity as an immigrant or lack of citizenship, which doesn't take them out of a protected status in terms of being singled out by people and including, that might lead to police detentions. I don't know if did I make that?
Yeah.
Clear? I don't know
No, that makes sense.
Articulated that well, but
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think that while it might be grounded in statutory law, statutes prohibiting national origin forms of discrimination or hate crimes, it is a category in a sense that's broader than that. And it may have some foundation in that legally. So it may be worthwhile, I'm just thinking this out, to place it as a separate category.
I'm in favor of adding it.
And is it Sergeant Ledoux?
Thank you, Commissioner Chang. I just want to add that AB 600, the change of immigration status, falls basically, that changes Penal Code 422.56, our subsection C, nationality. So it is a change in the penal code, which is why it's referenced up above there. And so it's a subsection within that. So just as a point of reference, if we add that subsection within nationality, every one of these have numerous subsections. So just to kind of put a little context of how the policy got there. So AB 600 changed Penal Code 422.56 to include the immigration status within nationality. So that's the change in the law, and that's where it falls within this policy.
That's really, really helpful. I appreciate that. You guys always have a lot of a great information that we can consider now. So then in terms of like the pragmatic terms of someone public facing or officers, et cetera, looking at this, while there is that regulatory amendment or change, it does sound like we at least have one board member, and I'm thinking that as well, of breaking it out in its own category of immigration status, ensuring that doesn't somehow conflict with standing law, which doesn't appear to.
Well, I pulled up for a 422.56, so I think that comment by Lieutenant, is it Ledoux? Sergeant. Okay, well, it's always better to guess higher up, isn't it? Anyway, I think he's got a good point there. This language is mirroring that section. So I don't know if it would make sense to add something if we're trying to stick with the kind of legal framework that's in place. Is that essentially what you were saying, Sergeant Ledoux?
Yes, that's correct. It just, right now, it's a little more succinct. If we start expanding, it just becomes a lot wordier and more convoluted. We want to make sure that we can keep people to be able to read it and know.
Yeah.
And the idea, I mean, we have training so frequently, but it's there front and center. But if anyone ever has question, they can look up above and see that reference and get further clarification. But it would become certainly a lot wordier, and it's going to require a lot more updates because it's going to constantly change and evolve as time goes on too.
Well, and the problem also is a prosecutorial problem, because if you have something that doesn't fit in the framework of the penal code, even if you focus on somebody as discrimination based on immigration status, it may not be prosecutable under this statute or any other. I don't know. I mean, that's all. I think I agree with you.
Sure. So you mean that it prosecutable in the sense that You wouldn't prosecute on the basis of hate crime of
Right,
immigration status. It would be nationality vis-a-vis
right.
immigration status.
Yeah, this is literally a copy of that penal code section. And I think that makes more sense to keep that framework. If your goal is to identify people who have committed this crime and therefore can be prosecuted for its violation.
Director Lee, I know you had your hand up before.
I was gonna say pretty much the same thing because I pulled up AB 600 and also I noticed that, well, thanks to Sergeant Ledoux, he points out it's not an exclusive list, and the beginning of the paragraph talks about because one or more of the following, never mind. I'll go back, I'll rely on the first thing that I said.
So the argument is for simplicity and alignment with
Right.
the existing regulations, and it does capture nationality, and those who are in the know in terms of officers, et cetera, would know to look to that. The other question would be, in terms of folks looking at this, because these are also public facing documents, would they also understand that under nationality, immigration status is captured as well? And there's a kind of pro and con aspect of that. Board Member Calavita?
Well, I'm also looking at this penal code, and is it not possible to have a Berkeley hate crime policy that exceeds nationality? It says includes citizenship, country of origin, and national origin. Does not include immigration status. And I feel strongly that in this part of the country, especially immigration status that is perceived undocumented status, or it's not about country of origin. So I guess my question is it not possible to have a policy at the city level that is
Sure. I mean,
broader than what the penal code dictates?
yeah, we can. Is it meet or exceed the provisions of 135196C?
I mean, nationality, literally it says, quote, citizenship, country of origin, and national origin. It's not about immigration status.
And this would go back to city council. And if we added that additional component and they passed it, that would be the local Berkeley regulation. I'm kind of hearing both sides about ensuring that there's that protection. So it's understood that it's there very explicitly instead of having to interpret it, because nationality maybe doesn't capture it in the way in and of itself of just putting it out there as like it
neither captures it nor when it's expanded in this penal code. I mean, not very much, but it says it means citizenship, country of origin, or national origin. And that doesn't cover what we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Board Member Levine is actually flagging her hand as well. Then I want to go back to Director.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're looking at.
Yeah, I'm not either.
Because I'm looking at a January 1st, 22 amended 422.56, which says nationality means country of origin, comma, immigration status, comma, including citizenship and national origin.
Okay, I'm looking
that
at
might have been already amended in the California legislature.
Yeah. So they're looking at the amended version. You might have looked at pre-amended, but that aside from that, though, the question for me is, even if it is ensconced in the law under nationality, do we need to put it out there in a public facing document to write it out as a category? Because it is Berkeley, we're on the West Coast, and we have a lot of immigrants here.
Well, I think what you're asking isn't just what the definition of nationality includes, but whether the hate crime policy in for the Berkeley Police Department should have the parenthetical following these categories that explains what they include.
It It wouldn't necessarily have to be a parenthetical. It could
Well,
be.
I just meant that
I see what you're saying, yeah.
figuratively, you know, how, whatever is appropriate, whether it's helpful to do that, because I agree with Board Member Calavita that absolutely we don't want to limit our concerns about the community and policing of hate crimes to some inadequate definition. Which is why I had originally said that, but then when I pulled the section up, I saw that it includes this. So I guess what I'm saying is, does this need to be expanded upon a little bit for policy purposes?
I feel like it needs to be broken out into its own category because it's a Berkeley policy. As Board Member Calavita is reflecting, it is an amendment, as Board Member Levine has noted. It's in the regulation, the penal code, but I think it'd be helpful to have it on the face of this document because it's a pretty broad category. There's a lot of immigrants in our community, and there is a concern around issues of discrimination and hate crimes. But I want to make sure that also checking on time, 8:43. So we have Board Director Lee and then Board Member Ramsey.
Chair, I'm gonna suggest that maybe we continue this because we do have two members of the police department who
That's
are
right, they're waiting.
here.
All right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Or no, that's
No need to apologize. I just, if, you know,
this
take
is
as long
important.
as it needs, but this is
Absolutely.
not.
but-
Unfortunately, we're running out of time tonight.
Yeah. So Board Member Ramsey, do you have a comment?
Not if we're going to continue.
Okay. So let's continue this. Do you have a Word version of this you could put a comment on or something? Or how would we do? You're just in your notes for the minutes, Director Lee, just noting.
I'll make some notes. Chair.
Okay. Thank you. And Board Member Calavita, you still have your hand up. You have something to add?
Sorry, no.
Okay. Thank you, Lieutenant Turner and Sergeant Ledoux. That's very, very helpful. And we're going to continue this as in shift it over to the next meeting again. And all of us, including myself, will take another look at this between now and the next meeting. Thanks. So it is now 8:44. And again, we have two folks waiting for us. So we're down to consider ways to, under 9B, consider ways to contribute to the hiring section of the Permanent Director of Police Accountability and the Police Accountability Investigator. So I'm going to take a break again, and Board Member Calavita will act.
This is Board Member Levine's agenda item. So,
well, I sort of said what I had to say when I gave the committee report. We have talked in our subcommittee about ways to assist in the recruitment process. And I think that's what we'll continue to do at our subcommittee meeting. I had some time ago brought up to include in this conversation, which isn't clear here. That's what got me confused about this.
oh, okay.
That I feel, and I'm on the budget committee too, and this is where the two intersect. We're clearly going to get additional bodies, I believe. And it was the city manager who was encouraging in terms of the expansion of the proposed budget that we came up with based on historic budgeting of the PRC and kind of the unclear changes, but some changes that exist in the PAB. I feel that it would be very helpful, not just to have a policy person, although that is a nice category. It's broad and can include a lot, but it seems to me that investigation is part and parcel of what this broader PAB mandate that we've been given includes. And to stick with an old rubric of one investigator and one director. Well, a director is clearly going to have to be in charge of things, but to rely on one person to be the sole investigator, I think is unrealistic. And I think it was board member Owens who pointed out that it's very likely our tasks aren't going to decrease, but only increase in terms of policy investigation, complaints, if this board is truly given this broader scope of authority. So I'd like to include in that more investigation and have the board be part of that discussion of how additional investigation can be used and how the board members can assist and collaborate in the investigative process. So that has been my interest, and I'm interested in what the board thinks about that, because I get the impression, well, I think that Director Lee said to me that it's not our role to have input on the hiring of an investigator, and there is going to be a permanent investigator hired. Sometimes it's the interim that migrates to that more lofty permanent position, but whether that happens or whether there's an additional one, I think we should have some say in it. And I think we should have some input on the direction investigations take. So that's my 2 cents on this. I think it's important because I think sometimes, well, first of all, nine heads are better than one. And can't we do a better job if we all have a voice in the direction of the information we're seeking? And if we have the subpoena power to access after investigation, after all, in my experience, you really don't subpoena something until you know that it, number one, exists and what it contains. Otherwise, you're on a wild goose chase. And so that's why I hope that we could expand our search in the director search committee or have a separate one, although that doesn't necessarily make much sense, to include the investigator search, whether it's just the permanent or hopefully an extra.
Board Member Owens, do you have your hand up?
I do. So the charter makes it very clear in section 14I that the director of police accountability hires the investigator. So I don't think that, although, you know, board members may feel that we should have a part in that, I think the charter makes it clear that that's the responsibility of the director. Now, I'm sure if the board wants to give the director some thoughts on what we think is important for an investigator that should be considered, I'm sure that the director would be open to hearing those thoughts. But ultimately, the charter gives the hiring responsibility to the director. And so I don't think that that's something that we can even, like I said, even though it may be something that some board members want, I don't think that's something that we can even discuss, honestly, because the charter is very clear with that.
But, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, well, it's like the director search. We certainly don't have any authority to hire the director, but I think it was of assistance to have our input, not only in the brochure, but in the final selection. Now, we're not going to select the director. We were solicited to give input on what we'd like to see. And we did that, and we edited the brochure, and we were heard, and that was very good. And I'm looking forward to continuing along the lines of vetting and making recommendations. But I'm hoping that not just hiring, but that we can ask questions that we might have about cases that are brought to us, or policy questions such as the one that where we've had a couple, one from Alta Bates Hospital death, one having to do with the death of the man who was temporarily in custody in Berkeley PD for intoxication. And I have questions that might benefit one or both of those investigations, and I'd like to have those questions answered. How does that happen? It happens through investigation. So now I'm hoping there's an ability to ask those kind of questions, not to be given something that then raises a question, but there's no answer to. Won't we serve our function and our community better with more information? And how else to get that but asking good questions and making sure that they're answered?
Board Member Levine, I don't want to interrupt.
No, I'm done.
I don't want to get too much into that question, because that's not exactly about the selection of the director and the investigator. And I think we need to stay on the agenda.
Oh, well, that was my support of why I think we should have a voice in hiring the investigator.
I see. And how do you think that's best accomplished?
In the same way that we're participating in the selection of the director.
Mm-hmm.
It's too late now to have a role in soliciting an investigator for the temporary role, but the permanent one will presumably, I don't know if they'll hire a headhunter for that, probably not. It's the director, but the director's going to look for candidates. Maybe we would have some suggestions other than merely say, hey, Joe Blow, there's a job for you. Why don't you apply? We could be vetted in terms of questions that we might have to ask an investigator, background and experience, and where to possibly look for complementary investigators to serve our board and director.
Director Lee, did you have something to?
Well, actually, Board Member Harris had her hand raised first, and I'll go after her.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that the reason that the charter is stated the way that it is, indicating that it's the director's responsibility, is because keep in mind that the director has to work directly with that investigator too. So I think that since we're working on the committee for the director, that we should have confidence that the director can select an investigator with whom they can work with, or that they feel that they can work with in their office. Because we don't want to put someone or have any, not that we can select it, but the director has to have some flexibility in who is hired to work in that capacity. Those are just my thoughts.
Director Lee.
I wanted to say that the director position is different. The investigator is a civil service position. The director, as is true with all the director level positions in the city, are answerable directly. Well, no, I take it back. The city manager is over many of the department directors. So the city manager certainly is subject to a process of hiring that is much different than your other line employees, and I would say that that's the same difference between the director of police accountability and the investigator. I agree with Board Member Harris's point that the director needs to be able to hire somebody who they're in sync with. And that is why for the permanent position, my intent is to start this recruitment process, but leave the final decision up to the permanent director. I just, fingers crossed that we have a permanent director sooner rather than later, and that there's a small, not a gap at all in it between me and my successor. But clearly the director position is contemplated as one that gets a lot of public scrutiny, and so there's a lot of public input into that. But as far as everybody under the director, they're under the supervision and the direction of the director. So they really, it's appropriate for the hiring and the evaluation and the possible termination to be the decision of the director. Now, I'm not just speaking about me, but the future director.
But Director Lee, though, so Board Member Levine was acknowledging, of course, the director is responsible for hiring and possibly firing in those cases. But could there be a role for board members to give input as to what they think the most important criteria should be? And I mean, are there ways that we can?
Yes, I think it's appropriate to say these are the qualities we think are important in an investigator. I don't have any problem with that.
And do you think, would you?
But I don't
sorry.
think there's a role, for interviewing or deciding who you're going to interview. The process, and I think I've mentioned this before, it's very regulated, and in that kind of position you do not have members of the public a part of the hiring process.
Right. Board Member Owens, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I was going to suggest, and I think Director Lee just kind of confirmed, that if board members feel very strongly about what kind of qualities that they would like for the director to consider as they're hiring the investigator, I think that the board could come up with, whatever they think is appropriate to submit to the director to give some, at least from the board's perspective, some guidance as to what's important to the board and something that the director could potentially consider as they're hiring the investigator. I don't see where the director just said that's not an issue. So I think that's the way that the board can participate in this process, is coming up with, here's the things that we feel are important, and we hand that off to the director, and it's up to the director to take it from there. So I think that's the way we can participate in the process.
So can I just say,
Sure.
I think that's good. I mean, I agree, but in this recruitment process then, and in terms of the board making recommendations, would it be appropriate for the director's search committee or to create a separate one? It's hard to imagine that we would effectively, or efficiently, I should say, come up with suggestions as a whole board in a meeting. So could this be something addressed by a subcommittee so public members might have a say too? I don't know. Director Lee, is that possible?
Or the director search subcommittee
Or create another one? I just don't see how it efficiently gets accomplished in the whole board in the abstract.
I mean,
That's all.
that really how you organize that is up to you.
Okay.
I just have a real quick question. So is it possible for us to see what is actually in place with the city for that position as far
Yes,
as
absolutely.
qualifications, if there's any supplemental questionnaires that they have to answer and those types of things, because maybe reviewing that first,
Mhm.
might be helpful, and it might eliminate a lot of extra work for us too.
Yeah,
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will
you could send
send
that
that out.
to us.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you.
So maybe for the next meeting, people can think about how they want that to be structured, and I will
Oops.
send out the information you requested about the job description and supplemental questionnaire, and then the next meeting agendize this specific issue of how you want to go about doing that once you're armed with that information. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think
Yes,
that's
thank
good.
you.
Okay.
Board Member
Okay.
Harris, your hand is up. Is that from before?
Sorry, yeah, that was from before. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or issues? All right. That concludes 9B.
Thank you so
Oh.
much.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Board Member Calavita, for acting. We want to move quickly to the training. We do have a postponement on 10A. So I think unless we have other questions or comments, we're going to move into 10B with the training on constitutional and case law regarding searches, detentions, and arrests by Lieutenant Lindo.
Linda now?
Linda now. Apologies, Lieutenant. We have 1 hour, and it is now 9:03. So we'll be ending at about 10 o'clock. And apologies to folks in the public and members of the board that we're staying on a little bit later today. We are getting some training in, so much appreciated, Lieutenant. Thank you.
Good evening. Sounds like you have a long night so far. For those that don't know me, I'm Lieutenant Dave Lindenau. I've been with the department for about 27 years now. And I've also asked Sergeant Joe Ledoux here, so you've got some benefit of having him answer some of your policy stuff earlier, since I asked him to be here for this. He's, correct me if I'm wrong, but he's been with the department for about 16 years now, I think. And he's currently a sergeant in the Professional Standards Division. So we were asked to present some training to you on how our officers are trained in the legalities of search and seizure and detentions and arrests. So we put together a quick PowerPoint presentation on some of what our officers are currently being taught in the academy, as well as in our department in regards to these issues. As we go along, feel free to ask any questions and we'll do our best to answer them. By no means do we proclaim to be the be all end all on all this, and case law changes all the time and our policy changes all the time. So, but we'll do our best, and I'll see if I can share my screen here. Give me a second. You guys seeing my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, I'm going to talk about the basic principles of search and seizure law. So we'll touch on First Amendment protections, reasonable expectation of privacy, probable cause versus reasonable suspicion, probable cause to search or arrest. I'll also touch on search warrants a little bit, and then the warrantless search exceptions. So first off, Fourth Amendment protections that we have. All of us have the right, which most of you are probably pretty familiar with this, that we all have the right to be secure in our persons and homes and our property against unreasonable searches and seizures. It also states that the warrants will only be issued with probable cause and that are supported by oath or affirmation. And in that probable cause, you'll have to describe the location and the to be searched and the person or the items that you're actually looking to seize. The Fourth Amendment does not give absolute right to privacy, and it also does not prohibit all searches. And once again, the searches need to be based on probable cause. It limits searches conducted by the government that are considered unreasonable by the courts. When the courts are trying to just decide reasonableness or unreasonable, they must look at the totality of the circumstances of the situation at hand. And then they have to balance the individual rights to privacy against the need to gather evidence and apprehend criminals. So what is a reasonable expectation of privacy? Basically, it can exist anytime and any place as long as the individuals have indicated that they personally expect privacy in an object or an area. This is also like a subjective expectation of privacy, which is a state of mind or something you've done to suggest you expect privacy, like around your home. You've built a fence, put a lock on your gate, have bushes or shades that cover your windows. So you've done something that show that you would expect privacy. And the expectation is one that society is prepared to recognize as something legitimate, which is also described as objectively reasonable. Common term that most of you probably have heard before is fruits of the poisonous tree. It's also called the exclusionary rule. Basically, it was created by the courts to encourage proper law enforcement conduct. It's not in the Constitution, but basically, if the court decides that the search or seizure was not reasonable and the Fourth Amendment rights have been violated, all the items or evidence recovered will be not used in court. That's even if it went to court, because oftentimes if the officer wrote the case and wrote how they found whatever evidence, if the DA did not believe it, if the DA believed it violated the rights, the case would never make it to court and the case would not be charged. Anybody got any questions at this moment before I continue? So now I'll talk about probable cause versus reasonable suspicion. It's confusing for some people, but basically the only difference between the two is that probable cause requires a higher quality or quantity than that of reasonable suspicion. They're based on an assessment of the overall force of the facts at hand in the situation you're dealing with. So for probable cause to search, you need enough facts or information to provide a fair probability or substantial chance that whatever you're looking for is located at the place you want to search. And probable cause to arrest, again, fair probability or a substantial chance the arrestee committed the crime. It's not more than 50%. It's just given with what you're looking at, it's fair probability or substantial chance what you're looking for is going to be there, or the person you're looking at did the crime that you're looking at. Whereas reasonable suspicion is used when you're going to conduct a detention of somebody, which that just requires a moderate chance. It exists if circumstances merely were consistent with criminal activity. It doesn't have to mean that actually was criminal activity, but based on what you're dealing with in your experience, you believe that there might be criminal activity about to happen or just happened. And that would be typical when officers respond to a call of someone breaking into a car or something, and the description is somebody in a red hoodie and black jeans, and the officer is responding and they see somebody leaving that area wearing a red hoodie and black jeans. That would give that officer reasonable suspicion to believe that's the person that someone called in and said that they broke in their car. Once you make that detention based on reasonable suspicion, you then would continue your investigation to develop whether probable cause to make an arrest or not. And that would be by doing, in-field show-ups with the witness, or maybe the person's on probation, you do a probation search and they have the property that was taken from the car. Then that's how that's used in typical patrol operations. So again, probable cause to search, officers must be able to articulate why they have a fair probability to believe that a crime has occurred or is about to occur, evidence pertaining to that a crime actually exists, and the evidence that at the location they wish to, that it's at the location they wish to search. The police officer's training and experience is relevant in establishing the probable cause, and the facts must be seen and weighed as understood by a reasonable officer with a particular officer's training and experience. Not all officers have the same training and experience. Something that Joe and I could be responding to the same call, and I pass somebody up because it doesn't really match the description, but Joe comes along 30 seconds later, and maybe he was on a call yesterday of the same call, and the person was stopped yesterday and nobody wanted to prosecute, so the person was arrested. And so Joe stops him because, oh, he did it yesterday here, so he had the reasonable suspicion to do it, but I didn't because I knew nothing about the call the day before. So probable cause to arrest exists if there's a fair probability or substantial chance that the arrestee committed the crime under investigation. Probable cause to search and probable cause to arrest just differ in the content, but not the degree of certainty. You just need a fair probability or substantial chance to search something if it's probable, or if there's a chance that it's where you're looking to search. And probable cause to arrest, same degree of certainty, it's just that the person did what the crime that you're investigating. So I'll touch on search warrants just for a minute, because under the Fourth Amendment, that's the only way you're supposed to be able to search somebody or a property. So what is a search warrant? It's an order in writing in the name of the people, signed by a judge, directed to a police officer. And it commands that officer to search for an individual or multiple individuals, some kind of item or thing or property, and bring it before a judge. What you need to be able to get a search warrant is you need probable cause. So an officer must be able to articulate that a crime has been committed and that there's some kind of evidence of that crime, or maybe you're seeking to identify that person and you have to believe that it's located in the place you're looking to search. And you have to articulate that in your probable cause statement of the search warrant. As for arrest warrants, you have to articulate probable cause again, the crime committed, and that the individual that you're looking to arrest committed the actual crime. So you have to lay that, all your probable cause and your reasons to make that arrest of that person. The benefit with getting a search warrant, the courts have found that searches and seizures are reasonable and lawful when they're authored by a valid search warrant. And so this will leave the burden on the defendant to prove that the search was illegal or the warrant was invalid. We have electable policies for search warrants, which is 606, and there's several things in it, but the main things for like officer level that they're expected to know when they're just trying to prepare one is that they should be getting authorization from a supervisor first, and then they prepare their affidavit and search warrant, and then they would have their supervisor review it first, and then they would submit it to a judge for approval. And then if it's a search warrant, the type of search warrant that you're going to be going to a residence to serve and not just some kind of electronic company or something like that, we have what we call a risk assessment sheet, which is several factors, and it's a checkbox thing, and to determine whether it is something of high risk that would require our special response team consult. Sometimes a consult results in them doing the warrant, and sometimes it just helps us develop a plan on how to serve the warrant. And the big change we had last year is our policy now says that we cannot ask for no-knock warrants, which was not a common thing we would do anyway, but that now our policy says we can no longer do that. So that's a new change to our policy for search warrants. So now I'm going to talk about the warrantless search exceptions. So under the Fourth Amendment, warrantless searches of private property were basically presumed illegal. But case law has created some exceptions to the warrant requirement. And they'll be upheld if the officer's conduct came within one of these exceptions. And the courts have to decide whether the warrantless search or seizure was legal. And they'll have to, again, consider the totality of the circumstances of the situation that you're dealing with. They always have to specific facts to demonstrate the search was and seizure fell within one of the exceptions of the warrant requirement. So what are some of the warrant search exceptions? Plain view, exigent circumstances, cursory search or pat search or carry search, probable cause, consent, search incident to arrest, inventory search, probation, and parole searches. Which a plain view search is actually not considered a search. It's not a Fourth Amendment protection if because the owner has no expectation of privacy if you're actually seeing something in plain view. But the officer has to have a lawful right to be in the place they are. So there are some requirements to plain view. So for an officer to actually see something that is in plain view, First off, they have to have actual probable cause that the item that they want to see is some kind of contraband or illegal item, or perhaps it's evidence of a crime, like maybe they're investigating a burglary and they're contacting the suspect and the suspect allows them in the house, and there's some descriptive item that they see on the the kitchen table that is clearly the evidence you're looking for, and then you could see that because they allowed you in their home. A lawful right to be in the location. They allowed you in, you see evidence that is clearly evidence of the crime. If there was additional evidence, you would then have to either get consent from them or then seek a search warrant to look for any additional evidence that was involved in that crime you're looking at. And you have to have lawful access to the item. So if I was outside a home and looked in and saw that same item I was looking for, but no one answered the door, but I see it on a kitchen table, and I believe that I have probable cause to believe that's the item I'm looking for, I wouldn't just be able to break down the door and get it. There's no exigency at that moment. I'd have to write a warrant and then come back and get the item. Next one, exigent circumstances. So basically to have that, there has to be a compelling need for action and no time to secure a warrant. And so there has to be some kind of emergency situation requiring the officer to act to prevent either imminent or immediate danger to somebody's life or safety, serious damage to the property, immediate escape of the suspect, destruction or removal of evidence. But once you've gone in under that exigency and you've resolved whatever that initial emergency was, most likely if you're going to want to search for anything else, you would then have to what we call freeze the scene and hold it and secure it, and then someone would go author a search warrant to search for whatever else you're looking for in that case. So once the emergency is settled down, you would then freeze the scene and then go obtain a search warrant to look for anything else. So common terms are hot pursuit and fresh pursuit under exigent circumstances. Hot pursuit would be if an officer saw somebody out in public and they had either probable cause or reasonable suspicion to detain or arrest the individual, but they're in a public place, they see the officer stop and try to get out and contact them, and they run inside a home, whether it's theirs or somebody else. The officer could pursue them inside that residence and arrest them. But once again, if there was a belief that you lost sight of them and you had reason to believe that they hid some contraband or a firearm or something, you would then have to freeze the scene and author a search warrant to actually search for any evidence you're looking for. But you'd have to have cause to believe that that happened and it's there. And then the term fresh pursuit is used when there's no physical chase itself, but it's an investigative pursuit. So you're actively investigating and following leads that are taking you to locations. This would be used for a serious felony. And then throughout that process, you come about information that you believe you know where the suspect is, and you reasonably believe that they're inside, and if you don't act now, it's likely they're going to escape. I have a couple examples of different exigent circumstances. So the first one, 2 officers were investigating a carjacking that occurred earlier in the day. When the officers arrested 3 of the known suspects outside of a residence, one of the suspects told the officers that the 4th suspect was inside the home. Entry into the residence by officers without a warrant was lawful to prevent escape of the 4th suspect. So that would be the fresh pursuit. They're actively investigating. They detain and arrest 3 people outside, and they come upon information that they tell them that the other person they're looking for is inside the house right there. So that would be like a fresh pursuit situation. Another example is commercial property was found unlocked and unattended. The officer entered the property to locate the name and phone number of the owner to see if there were any signs of someone inside. While inside, the officer discovered contraband in plain view. The entry was legal because the officer was attempting to prevent damage or further damage to the property. So that's an example of you come upon something and you're just honestly trying to figure out. You could also be trying to figure out if someone just broke into it, but you're trying to care for the property or lock it up, and you see something that you would have to see that you know is illegal. That would be a legal thing, entry under exigent circumstances. And here's another example. While while an officer is responding to a neighborhood complaint of strange noises coming from a nearby apartment, officers found a trail of blood in the hallway leading to the apartment door. When the officers started to announce themselves, they heard vague moaning sounds from inside. The officers reasonably believed the suspect inside the apartment was in need of immediate medical attention. They entered the property without a warrant or consent. So that would be an example of, for life safety. They believed somebody was in peril, and so they went in to figure out what was going on. Any questions at the moment as I continue? I hear none. So the next exception is what we call a cursory search or pat search. So the elements to this would be, first, you have to have a lawful detention. So you'd have to have reasonable suspicion to detain somebody that you suspect was involved in a crime or a crime that was about to be committed. You also have to have a reasonable belief for some reason, and you have to be able to articulate why you think this person is armed or dangerous. And the search is limited just for weapons and not for contraband or other evidence. You can't just say, I did it for officer safety. I do pat searches on everybody that I come in contact for my safety. That does not fly. You have to be able to articulate, and it has to be reasonable why you did that. And some of the common reasons, there could be several others, but common ones would be clothing. We often contact people with bulky clothing or 3 jackets, several pants on. You can't really tell if they have anything on them that could hurt you. Maybe when you came up to stop them, they reached under their jacket or put something in their pocket really quick, or when you're talking to them, then their hands keep going to their pocket even after you're telling them not to. Maybe you have prior knowledge of the individual that they've been caught with weapons before, it always carries a knife or something. You're going to want to be like, what's the reason for the detention? Was it a brandishing of a screwdriver or a knife, or was it 2 neighbors, arguing over about their property line because one of the neighbors cut the tree, or what are you investigating? Is it reasonable to believe that you might be in danger? Is there 6 people detained and 2 officers? So under a fight that you broke up a fight, so it would be reasonable to think that officers should pat search the 6 individuals before they can continue on their investigation and get distracted and not able to monitor them. The location that the detention's in, is it a high crime area? Is it known for violence? Is it daylight, nighttime? So those are some of the common reasons that you could articulate, but the common mistake is officers don't articulate that in their report, but as long as they do that, it's pretty simple. But your search is limited to outside the clothing. The only times you could reach inside the clothing or the pockets would be as if when you were doing your pat search, you felt something that you believed was a weapon or something that could be used as a weapon. The other thing would be is they have 4 jackets on and you can't tell what there's something there, but you can't tell, but you believe it could be a weapon. So you can go ahead and pull it out and make sure it is or isn't a weapon that could hurt you for your safety. Next one, probable cause search of vehicles. Basically for vehicles, it's pretty simple. If you have enough probable cause to write a search warrant on a vehicle, you do not have to write a search warrant. So if you have probable cause to write a search warrant, basically you can search a vehicle without writing a warrant. It's referred to as an automobile exception. But there's some factors you have to have. You have to have the vehicle legally stopped or accessible, and you actually have to have probable cause that whatever you're looking for, it would be inside that vehicle. If the vehicle is on private property and you think that they would have a reasonable belief or expectation that where it's on the car's parked on their property, that they'd have an expectation of privacy, then it would be wise to seek a search warrant so you don't have a problem in court if you recover something. Next one would be consent. And so for consent, it has to be voluntary, and the consent has to be from someone that you believe has the authority over what you're wanting to search. It must be free of will. You can't coerce them to do it. So you have to make it clear that you're requesting permission to search something and not demanding it of them or making threats that if they don't consent, you're going to go get a search warrant. It has to be clear that they're consenting to you to search something. They can consent that, yeah, you can search my car, but I don't want you to search my backpack. Or they can limit what they want if it's just the consent search. Another search of vehicles would be an incident to arrest, and there's certain elements to that. But first, you would have to have probable cause for a lawful custodial arrest, which would mean you're going to be taking them and booking them into the jail, not just a citation out in the field. So you need probable cause for the custodial arrest, and then an unsecured arrestee with reachable access to the vehicle or reasonable suspicion to believe evidence of the arrest is to be found in the vehicle, or reasonable suspicion there's a weapon in the vehicle. So those are the elements if you were going to do a search incident to an arrest. The next one on a vehicle would be an inventory search, which that's relating to if you're towing the vehicle, which again, the vehicle must be in lawful custody. And the search must be conducted pursuant to a standard procedure. Here in our department, we have what we call CHP 180 form, which is a form you fill out when you tow a vehicle. And you have to document the condition of the vehicle and anything of value in the vehicle. So that's our standard procedure. And the inventory is not taken for the purpose of finding evidence or contraband, but basically taking note of personal property of value to protect our department. Or if you find something of value and they're there, you can ask them to take it, or if they have somebody they want to come get it so it doesn't go to the tow yard. And then we come for probation and parole exceptions. Probation and parole aren't the same. Probation is basically a sentencing alternative for a person convicted of a crime and is granted by a judge. Instead of being incarcerated, the individual remains in the authority of the probation department. And probation terms can vary from person to person. And so you always want to check what somebody's terms are before you would try to do a probation search. Parole conditions, conditional release from the state prison, which allows an individual to serve the remainder of their sentence outside of prison. Probation and parole searches require the officer to do it. You have to know their conditions prior to the search. You can't stop somebody, search somebody, and then find out they were on parole or probation and then base your search off that. It has to be not prior knowledge and that their search conditions include the search that you're doing. They can't be conducted in an arbitrary or capricious or for harassment purposes. Cellular phones and electronic devices may be searched when the person is on parole or when they're on post-release community supervision or PCRS, because that's a standard condition of people on parole. Some probationers will have that search condition expressly authored, but that's not everybody on probation does not have that. So you'd have to search their specific conditions and look for that if you were going to do a search of their cell phone or electronic device. So again, probation and parole law is a warrantless, suspicionless. Probation or parole searches are both reasonable under the Fourth Amendment, according to the Supreme Court, but this now differs from our policy 311, which this is why I brought Joe along, because he's the one that had to do with the policy changes in 311 and both consent and probation. So I brought him here to talk about those. Before we move on, is there any questions about the stuff that I addressed? Take that as a no. Joe, if you're awake.
I am, thank you. So we'll discuss the update to 311. And
excuse me, board member Calavita had her hand raised.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
You're muted.
You have your mute on.
So these probation and parole warrantless searches, that's for the state of California, but that's not.
That's what I discussed. Sergeant Ledoux is going to talk about our current policy changes, our most recent policy changes, and what those are. That's right. What I'm about to get into.
But what I meant was other states don't allow for those warrantless searches of probationers and parolees.
I don't know what other states do. I work in California.
Okay.
Okay, so updates to 311. As it says here, the asking if someone's on probation or parole was dealt with or addressed with PRC, then PRC in October 2020. And so the language changed. Now, officers should only ask if they're on probation or parole in the following instances. First, to protect the safety of others or the person detained or officers. That would be an example would be there's a critical incident where the officers don't have the ability to wait to conduct a records check, perhaps a shooting or something like that. Secondly, would be to further a specific law enforcement purpose. An example of that would be if you do a records check of somebody that has a common name and you get, this happens so often, but you'll get 32 different hits and you just need to find out, ask somebody, are you on probation or parole? Because, it may take a long time to get through the records checks, or you're looking at date of births or whatever the case may be. It's sometimes an efficiency thing. And the third is to confirm probation or parole status subsequent to a records check. So just to confirm you're still on probation for whatever crime. That's good because there's case law that actually talks about that. There's instances where the databases will be down and they'll sit there and say, no. In fact, we saw this, I think it was 2 years ago when they changed the probation statuses from some 5-year felony probations, they limited it down to 3 years. And then the solve for that, for most police departments in the state of California, was to go ahead and ask people, hey, has your probation been adjudicated? You're no longer on probation? Yep. Nope. Okay. Because there's case law that supports that. And then it's in our policy. We train this, but when we're asking people or if we're confirming that they're on probation and parole, we keep in mind that people take offense to this at times and we treat people with dignity and respect. And that's, I think it goes without saying, but nonetheless. Warrantless search of probation and parolees. So under the new updates to 311, officers shall not search a probation or parolee just simply because of their status. So for example, an officer is driving, observes a known probationer for domestic violence walking to Trader Joe's. Under this new updated policy, simply stopping and searching this probationer would no longer be in policy without some other articulable facts that establish reasonable suspicion. So another example, or a continuation rather, the policy, the decision to detain and conduct a probation or parole search of an individual should be done at a minimum in connection with articulable facts that create reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed, is about to be, or is currently. So, for example, an officer conducts a traffic stop in the area of Ashby and Dorr Streets. During a records check, the officer learns the occupant's on parole for a firearm offense. That officer has knowledge that area has had recent shootings, and they reasonably believe that the person may be in the area to commit a crime. In this circumstance, there's articulable facts that would establish reasonable suspicion, and then the probation search in this scenario would be within policy. Next, a car stop alone of a probation or parolee does not satisfy the articulable fact portion of this updated policy. So another example, bike officers observe a known probationer for theft with a history of stealing from a victim business or location in 2300 block of Shattuck. This individual is standing in front of 2300 Shattuck. A detention and search based on the officer's articulable facts of this probationer that they may have just committed a crime or they're about to, based on their knowledge, would justify it. So just to be clear, this person, without anything else, without being near the victim business, anything else, would no longer. However, given those specific facts, that would be justifiable. Next, officers conduct a traffic stop in the Berkeley Hills at 3 a.m. and learn that the driver's on parole for robbery. The parolee doesn't have a viable reason for being in the Berkeley Hills at this hour. The officer is aware that this area has been plagued with Cadillac converter thefts in the recent weeks. Exercising the parolee search conditions would be appropriate within policy. And also note that in the underlying crime of the probation or parolee that they've committed does not necessarily have to be the contributing factor. So in this scenario, the parolee is on or has been, convicted for robbery. But the fact that the officers believe that they may be up there committing or about to commit catalytic converter test does not necessarily, they don't have to be one of the same. While doing a security check in the marina, officers contact a probationer for indecent exposure, sleeping in his car. The officer learns that the probationer has a search clause, and in this scenario, it says a 4-way, which is person, place, vehicle, and person, place, vehicle. Dave?
Property.
I'm missing the fourth one. What?
Property.
Property. Thank you. So this probationer has a full search clause. Without any other facts, this would not be within policy because there's no articulable facts. However, if the officer develops or has knowledge of articulable facts, such as there's been indecent exposure reports in that area, or that a reporting party, that's what we call RPs, calls in and says, yeah, this individual's doing indecent exposure, committing, masturbating in the car in the marina, those would lead to reasonable suspicion, and perhaps even further than that, that a crime has or is about to be committed, which then would justify the probation search in this scenario. Another example, officer conducts a traffic stop. A records check reveals that the driver's on parole. The officer has no other articulable facts that would allow for a search in the conditions, and the conditions to this policy would prohibit it. The officer still, though, may ask to do a consent search. Nothing in the policy prohibits an officer's ability to seek consent searches. So this one, again, the parole search alone would not be within policy. However, there's nothing that would prohibit an officer for seeking consent. Next is update to 311 under consent searches. So the revised Berkeley consent search form was created. Is designed to be in alignment with occasions that consent might be sought. It has a place for initials, signature. I think for whatever reason, the draft that's out there was not the final one. So it's been corrected to have the property or place to be seized line added. So there's a place for initials and signatures. Anyways, when appropriate, the officer should complete the sections, including the case number on the top, and route it to report review during a consent search. So question that is when exactly should I complete this form and when is it necessary? So officers shall complete the form when conducting a consent search without any other legal justifications. So when an officer's safety or exigency exists, we've trained, rely on your body-worn camera to capture the consent. For example, if you seek consent on an individual whom is suspected has a weapon, we're not asking our officers to pull out the consent search form and have it signed and then to go and move on to that search. We simply would then, in that instance, capture the individual's consent on body-worn camera. Anytime that form is not completed, it's expected that it'll be articulated, whether it's in the MDT, which is our data terminals, an incident or a case, the reason that it wasn't sought, or rather signed. Next question would be, what if I conduct a car stop, I develop probable cause, and the individual is on searchable probation? Should I still seek consent? And if so, do I need to get the consent search form signed? So it's trained in the academy, it's trained throughout careers, law enforcement officers, that it's always best to seek multiple justifications for legal justifications for searching somebody. So in this scenario, yes, if you're about to conduct a search and you're exercising the individual search conditions, you may seek consent too. It's always good practice to do that, especially coupled with other legal authority. In these instances, we continue to rely on our body-worn cameras to capture that consent and just document it in the report. The most notable deviation from past practices. Hang on, buddy, I'm in a meeting. Are you okay? Sorry, tired, almost 4-year-old here. The most notable deviation, I know I kept everyone on a cliffhanger for this, from past practice can be a consent search by itself. When we're seeking consent and there's no other legal grounds for a search, and there's no officer safety or exigency component, the policy now requires that we get a signed consent search form. Do you need to get this signed before the search? Yes, it should be, but as long as there's no other officer safety or exigency component. So that kind of goes back to the previous one. If you're asking for consent and you think somebody has a gun on them, we're not expecting our officers, for obvious reasons, to say, hey, please sign this form. We have body-worn cameras, they're going to be activated. But if it's just a normal consent search, then absolutely, that's the expectation. I think, at least on my paper, I think I'm on the last one. So what if someone gives consent but refuses to sign the consent search form? That's a possibility. In this instance, we would just note the refusal on the form. We would attach to the report. And for the purposes of court, and I want to speak on this a little bit more, it's a relevant but not significant factor. Again, the body-worn camera should be sufficient in the circumstances for the purposes of the court. So there is case law that if somebody doesn't sign or whatever the case may be, that is a factor when and if this gets presented as what would likely happen in a simple consent search form. And I think Commissioner Ramsey can speak to this, but is that it would get challenged. If that is the only legal status, oftentimes those cases will get challenged. So if somebody sits there and says, yeah, you can search me, I'm not going to sign that form. That's certainly a relevant, but it's not necessarily the most significant factor in a challenge to a consent search within the legal parameters. So those are our slides. Anyone have any questions on the policy stuff that I can hopefully speak to? Mind you, I've been up for, I don't know, I start my days at 5 a.m. So a little tired, but glad to help and hopefully answer some questions if there's any.
Thank you so much. And that's a very informative review. We have a question from Board Member Levine.
Yes, just can we get a copy of your PowerPoint or your cards here that you showed us?
I can email it to Kathy as long as
Thank
the city doesn't block it. It's too
Okay.
big, but I think it'll go through because it let me do it to Ladue the other day. So
Thank you Thank you for the presentation and for doing that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any or hearing any. We appreciate you taking your time, and we know you started late and you guys have a long work day as well. Thank you very much. So we're now moving on to, it's our 1 hour of con law today. Very exciting. I guess we're going on to public comment. Let me just pull up the timer. Let's see. Okay, we have like 2 people. Let me just make sure I have I apologize for the advertisement on here. I was trying to conceal the advertisement. I'm not obviously advertising on behalf of United Airlines. It's there because I was researching flights. So Carol Marasovic. Would you like to, and actually, hang on a second, Ms. Marasovic, let me share my screen so you can see the timer thing. Here we go. Oh, okay. Right. Ms. Marasovic, can you hear me? I don't seem to be able to hear you. You do seem to have your hand raised and talking has been permitted for you. So can we, Director Lee, can we move on to Cordell Hindler in the meantime? No, loop back to Ms. Marasovic.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So good evening, Chair Chang, board members. My name is Cordell Hindler and I'm a Richmond resident. And I wanted to speak on the previous item 9B because I didn't get a chance to speak on it. So hopefully in the future that we will able to move things around, because I mind the presentation, but I feel that the public should be able to comment on their old business. So that's one of my concerns, because I've been in similar meetings that had tend to go a little lengthier than I would have thought. So, but I will try to keep coming to these meetings more often as necessary. So that's one. And then number 2 is, let me see. I do have a future agenda request to bring to you all. This will be added for either the 13th or the 26th of April. Is creating a doodle poll, because I feel that as because I watch other boards and commission meetings go till a little length of time, and so I figured a doodle poll sounds better, because that way you can get everyone's input to figure out what time works best for them. So I was thinking that it can be added as a future agenda, because 11 o'clock, because I was reviewing the minutes from the previous meeting, and I said 11 o'clock. That's like late night time. That's like almost like the Tonight Show. That's a good one. So I said, because I love coming to these meetings, but I feel that it's like, if we can just like, hear the presentations and then allow the public to talk about it. So that's it. And I will pass my time to Carol Marasovic.
Thank you. Ms. Marasovic, can you hear me? So your hand is up and you're permitted to talk. We do see that you're muted. So perhaps we shall move to Kit Saganor.
Hi, thank you very much. That was a very interesting and pertinent training this evening. I'm very glad that the slide deck will be made available, and I expect you, of course, so you'll probably be posting it on the website, and I will look for it there. Thank you very much. That was really helpful.
Thank you. Lots of appreciation for the presentation. So, I'm not, or Carol Marasovic may be having some technical issues. I'm going to ask her one more time to see if she can come off of mute, try to come off of mute and provide her public comment. So it doesn't appear that Carol Marasovic is able to access her microphone. So are there any other, I don't see any other members of the public requesting comment. Director Lee, am I missing anything?
I don't see anyone else, Chair.
Okay, so I apologize, Carol Marasovic. Next time you can join again and provide comment. So great, so it's now 9:49. Unless there's anything else, would someone raise a motion for adjournment?
I'll make a
Yes, I
motion
move that we adjourn the meeting.
Thank you. Will someone second that adjournment, that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, neither seeing or hearing any objections, so moved, and we are adjourned. Thank you again.
Thank you. Good night.
Yeah.